All right, today let's do some fiberglass work. We need to go through, dust everything off of the shell here because it's been several days since we've worked on it. Have kind of a windstorm going on right now, so perfect time to be inside doing some work. We'll lay out that fiberglass and we're gonna put on our first epoxy coat. So I'll do a little time lapse. I'm most concerned about the ends, especially because these are pretty narrow. They didn't round over as much as I had anticipated it doing, but I'm gonna try and do some tricks at the ends in order to try and make sure that we're lapping it up. A little bit different than when I do my skin-on frames, because the skin-on frames I like to do upside down and actually put the shell inside, and then we do some hot glue along the edges in order to kind of get everything nice and taut. I'm always worried. The first time I ever did it, it didn't turn out all that great. So we're gonna give this a shot and see what happens. All right, so I have brushed out because I watched a guy building stuff, and that was one of his tricks in order to try and just get out a lot of the creases and wrinkles. One of the other things that I've done, especially because I'm the only one doing this, is I've put some pieces of wood, clamped it on the strong back, and I actually am kind of pulling the top line right through here past the actual canoe so that I can just kind of work that edge. I'm not sure if it's going to help me or not, but that's kind of one of the areas that are troublesome, especially out through here when you've got such a wide body and then it's tapering back in. So my concern is actually along the gunnel side or the top side of the canoe, because that's usually where you get wrinkles, not so much here on the bottom, because you can always just work those through the edge. So let's go ahead and mix up some epoxy and let's start putting this on. All right, learned a quick little lesson. Credit cards are way too small, or any gift cards, way too small in order to spread the material, especially getting it into the weave. So we've gone back to our Bondo knives in order to get that in, the squeegees, and they are working much better, much more efficiently. So get the biggest ones you can, and that'll save you a lot of time, especially if you're doing it by yourself. All right, so there it is. A little over 2 hours, about 2 hours and 10 minutes in order to get this in. Some things that we learned along the way. Obviously, the bigger squeegees are able to push it in much better than just tiny little credit cards. Credit cards are great for when you're trying to do some edge work or some small areas. You'll notice that I had propped up the ends on both sides with the fiberglass so that when we were working it to the front, we just snipped along it and then brought it up. Now, granted, there's going to be a little bit of an opening, so I'm going to have to come back with some thin strip fiberglass in order to build up the front and the back a little bit, especially since it's so pointed. I'm going to want that pretty small so that we don't have a lot of wrinkles. We did go back and try and double check if you will, the gunnels to make sure that those are on, because otherwise you got to sand out a bunch of wrinkles. Up here, we did have some type of stain or some inhibitor on the fiberglass. Have no idea, because that was what was rolled out last. Not certain what was going on, but very difficult to get the epoxy into it. So I did take a little bit of acetone, since that is a natural thinner for the epoxies, and you saw me press in hard with just my fingers in order to try and get it to soak and bind to the wood. You can tell just ever so slightly there's maybe some splotchiness to it where it didn't get a real good adhesion to it, But because the shell's already been epoxied once and then the fiberglass on top, I'm not going to worry about it too much. Plus, the other layers coming onto it should help fill in that weave a little bit more. So those were some of our tricks and tips and some of the problems that we ran into. Let's go ahead and let this dry for a few hours, and we'll come back and check it for coat number 2. All right, while the wind is howling, I just want to show real quick. It's been several hours now where it's hardened, but I wanted to show real quick kind of what I had in terms of my apparatus in order to hold this up, especially doing it kind of as one person. This is how I was able to pull the material out and kind of get it so that it would immediately start to sandwich and follow the lines rather than drooping down. Now, I always really struggled on the front of canoes when I did the last one, and so this was just a better option, I thought, in terms of trying to manipulate and hold the fabric in place. I'll probably put another, when I cut this off, seal it up, and then I will run a very small band of fiberglass just on the front, as well as through here as kind of a rub edge. It would be nice to have it underneath, but I'm really trying to get everything as smooth as possible. So we're going to go through. We've got a lot of fill on the weave still, so we're going to start working on second coat, but I just wanted to show you a real quick setup of what I did with some spring clamps and some wood in order to hold this out a little bit better. So I have a couple of notes about mixing. We found out when we were doing this that 4 pumps of the 207 gave us quite a bit of material, but we weren't able to work it in fast enough. So we then backed off to 3, and what seemed to be a little bit better was maybe 2 pumps in a yogurt container. And we were able to manage our time a little bit better. I'm not sure if you can see that on the time lapse. Because I'm going to roll now the second coat, I'm going to go back to the 4 pumps in terms of the quantity in here. And we'll see how this goes. So here we go, time lapse. All right, so you'll notice that I had started on this side, then got around over to the other side, and the roller characteristics changed. It started to get saturated with the epoxy. So there were far fewer air bubbles over on this side than over here. So that's why I kind of came back in order to, in a sense, try and roll out some of those bubbles that are in there. When we do our 3rd and 4th coat, we'll actually do a drag, and I'll show you how they recommend that on the bag. And it works out really smooth. So we'll come back. Well, I'm not going to worry too much about the bubbles. We'll do that in either stage 3 or stage 4, depending on how many coats it looks like it's going to take. This is a fairly thick weave. I think it's about a 7-ounce weave on the bottom here. So that's why we were struggling trying to get it in pushed as hard as possible. Also, unlike a paint roller, you do need to take your roller off and then clean it so that it will slide back on. If you by chance leave it on, again, it's epoxy. You might as well have several of these rollers on hand ready to go, because they're a little tricky to pull off. They're pretty tight, and then go back and clean them so that your next roller will fit on perfect. All right, so it's getting a little later in the evening. I think I want to do one more coat for the day. This will be our 3rd coat of epoxy, and I'm going to roll it on. You notice that there's a bit of a buildup of the epoxy, which is perfect. The nice thing about a roller is it's kind of a wide base, so it tends to level things out. I do still see some areas that are a little thin. I'm able to see the actual fiber. So we need to go through, fill up those areas, kind of like, in a sense, grading out, if you will, that epoxy. And then tomorrow morning, we'll come in, take a look. We may do a light sanding and then do a 4th coat. We'll just kind of see where it's at. But right now, if you drag your hand across, it feels like it's dry. However, if you just held it for just a little bit, you can feel the tackiness and it will save your fingerprint. So let's go ahead and get our third coat on, and we're going to roll it this time. All right, coat 3 is on, and you may have been wondering what I was doing in the time lapse. Weird, I was holding the brush. If you look at the instructions on the roller, they talk about while the epoxy is still wet, all right, a little bit tacky, you drag in order to pull those air bubbles out. And you usually do it towards your last layers that you're putting in. So that's what I was doing, is I was holding on to the roller with one finger in order to just kind of work on a very, very light drag. I'm not trying to scrape anything off. But it was really just to take that and smooth it out. Again, kind of like a road grader, as you think about just taking things and then just making it nice and even and level all the way across. So that's what we were trying to do. We're going to let this dry for the night. We'll come back tomorrow morning, check its tackiness. I have a feeling I'm going to have to do a light sanding on this before, or possibly doing a 4th coat. Most guys on videos are doing 4 coats of epoxy on this outside edge. We're just going to kind of go through and see, because it is kind of hard to manipulate and maintain that epoxy on here versus getting it to drip off to the side. So let it dry. We'll check it tomorrow morning, possibly a light sanding, and then a 4th coat if necessary. Otherwise, it'll be a light coat of sanding so that we're able to then put a varnish on there. Then we're going to start flipping it over, working on the other side. We will have to work on the ends here a little bit, finish that up. Again, I want to put an extra layer or 2 there. A lot of guys do it underneath. I'm not that talented, I'll be quite honest. I'm going to have to work on the outside edges of that. So we're going to do that a little bit later, but let's take it off for the evening. Have a wonderful night. We'll see you tomorrow.